Hey, welcome to the Story Studio podcast. I'll actually say the name of the podcast to begin with this time and not leave it as a mystery box. If you heard last week's episode, we talked about the future of the Stone Table imprint, which is the new name for our nonfiction books. So we used to call that the Smarter Artist line. We are now calling it the Stone Table line, and it's nonfiction books that are going to start coming out in June. Once a month, starting with the Smarter Artist Locker, which is a collection of 5 books for one low price. And just kind of complete your collection. And we have some other stuff coming out after that. But then there was a phase 2, and we're going to talk about that today. And that's why we have Neeve on again. Hi, Neeve. And I want to know if...
I can't hear you wave, by the way.
Okay. She just waved. But first I need to know if Dave went out to dinner since the last podcast. Or to Target since the last one we recorded with Neeve.
Yes. No.
Okay.
I especially love Neve's waving because the way Zoom works, it only goes to you if you make a sound. So there was
nobody saw it.
There was zero chance that anyone got that. But she loves you all.
Well,
do you remember that
for making me look great?
Do you remember that scene in Friends when Brooke Shields was stalking Joey? And he was like, we'll go down the back entrance because she won't recognize us because she doesn't know what I look like. And Chandler says, that's how radio stars escape stalkers. It's sort of similar. It's like a media transference. All right. So let's talk about phase 2, Stone Table. And why is it phase 2? Like, why is there a phase 2? Why is there a phase change? Why is it not just Smarter Artist? Or I should say nonfiction books.
It's just that we want to do it right. We're not rushing anything. We have, it's like what we did last year to prepare for this year. We want to take our time with these. We want to start with our specialty. So we're starting with our own stuff because we know you guys. We know what you need.
We're starting with our own stuff. What stuff would we have if not our own stuff, Sean?
Well, telling our own stories and teaching our own authors and then sharing with the community is just, it makes sense. If we were ignoring that and jumping to something else, it would be squirrel. And we've really learned to not do that. And it's also the nonfiction part of our company. I mean, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you've heard us say stupid things before, like, we're not a revenue-driven company. Well, that's what gets us in trouble. So we still are not a revenue-driven company, but we do need to care about revenue. But with our nonfiction, we actually have kind of a different purpose there. It's not that revenue isn't important. It's that ultimately its message is important. And
legacy. Neeve and I were talking about this we had a pair of meetings earlier this week where Neeve and I met, and then because Neeve is spearheading a lot of this, and
they also have to prepare for my chaos.
Right. Well, I mean that's a joke, but basically the idea of kind of corralling ideas before we bring them to Sean just reins in the conversation. So we talked about like what is the positioning like internally, like for us writing these books, what is the purpose? Because you make different decisions based on what know your why, and what I sort of pitched, and it seems like everybody agrees with, is that, yes, this needs to be a venture that makes money for us. Otherwise, that's a little absurd, especially at this point in where we are. It's not a charity. But that said, the driving thing is not how do we make as much money as possible? How do we generate some sort of like money funnel? But rather legacy. Like I think it really is about, we've been using for a few years since Fiction Unboxed. This is what's funny about this. Fiction Unboxed was like 2014, maybe. It's been a while. And we said, change the world with a story. That was the tagline for Fiction Unboxed. And it didn't really mean a lot. Like it didn't. Okay.
It sounded cool.
It sounded cool. And then the more, it kind of stuck around. And now we went with a few things like we make stories in Smarter Artists was something we said for a while. But then no, that didn't work, especially since we're not doing the Smarter Artist thing anymore. And so we were like, well, we changed with the world with story. And then that felt a little ham-fisted for a while because it didn't totally make sense. But then as these things do, it's weird because like the circumstances changed to fit the story we were telling, which is change the world with story, And now that's the goal. Like that is the goal of the Smarter Artist. I'm sorry, the Stone Table imprint is world changing stuff.
I'm wondering how long we can go without telling them what phase two, what could it be if it's not books from you guys telling your stories?
That
Okay,
was my infomercial prompt earlier, but I did it too early. I blew the punchline.
So I had Neeve, very much like she took Convertible Cookie and turned it into the Everlasting Funnel. She took the original tagline when I tackled her at the Renaissance and said, "Oh my God, we can keep Stone Table and it'll just be our nonfiction books." And I was super, super excited. I said, it's like knowledge that needs to be shared is kind of that was the original corralling that idea. And I don't know if it was a day later or 2 days later, but Neeve had done her processing and she came back and she said, I think a better angle here, and I love this, it's so perfect, is teaching the world through story. So last episode, we talked about how, we don't write dry nonfiction books. It's just not what we do. There are a lot of those books out there. And, after Write, Publish, Repeat, people really wanted us to write something else. And we were having a hard time, writing something else because stories is just so much fun. And at the time, it was a distraction from fiction because we were doing other things in education. It wasn't just like we could write the book. If we wrote the book, there had to be something else too. And so we wrote the one with all the writing advice to fight that because there are all these very traditional, very dry, like 7 ways to get your characters to speak or whatever, those books. If there's an actual book with that title, I'm sorry, I'm not shitting on it. I just made that up. But the idea that, filtering through our love of Friends and how we use shorthand together, that's the kind of book that Johnny and I can write over and over. And so that's the kind of thing we wanted to do. It's all story-based. But there's a lot of people that we know that are just amazing, that have amazing stories to tell, but more than the stories they want to tell, they have impact that they want to make. And one of the reasons that it's so important for us as humans and as characters and as storytellers to belong to masterminds like we do is because it puts us in touch with really incredible people who make us better humans and make us better storytellers. But now that we're closing down this, or have already closed down this whole education wing and opened up this nonfiction wing, then what is it that we want to do with nonfiction? It's not enough to just talk to our storytellers, but let's bring in other people who have causes, who have legacy that they want to change. I don't know if you guys want to talk specifically, I mean, certainly no names, but some of the themes that we could talk about, or the whole idea is that anybody who writes a Stone Table book with us, they are thinking about legacy. They are thinking about changing the culture, changing the way we think, changing the way that we behave and treat each other.
Yeah, and just to be clear on this, we're talking about for phase 2 people who we're bringing additional new people that you haven't seen before, and having them teach stuff. So I mean, that there'll still be nonfiction books where there's still stuff that you're learning, but it's through this lens of story. And so, but this is beyond just, teaching you how to write stories, teaching you how to market, in terms of books and self-publishing. So we're moving beyond just self-publishing to like the larger world of nonfiction. And I think what's really going to set a Stone Table book apart is that it will always be through this very personal, story-driven lens, so that it's like you can learn the stuff that you love to learn in good nonfiction, but it's always through that story piece, so that it's easier, it's not dry, it's easier to get through, but it's also going to be more impactful, I think, for the readers as well. Like, I love when I pick up a really good book with a great story where I'm like learning about something fascinating, but there's like almost like a main character I can follow through the arc of the book. I find that then that's when nonfiction is super impactful. And I know as authors that we're always wanting to learn about the world around us. Authors have this unique fascination with psychology and humans and what it is that we're doing on the planet. And so I think being able to bring a diversity of topics with the same sort of style, the story style of nonfiction, is super exciting.
Well, what separates phase one from phase two? I asked that question, but I knew the answer. I was prompting them. Is is that phase one is very much what you would expect from us. It is books aimed at writers and creatives, largely, if not really, on stuff that you would expect. So there's books on craft, on I mentioned the story solution. Obviously, the Smarter Artist Locker is not a new release, but it's a revamped release. It's like second edition, essentially, because we're going to add some extra stuff to it. But it's the books that you would expect. And the phase two is, you guys aren't even, and we've had some internal debate about this, but I still feel that the Smarter Artist audience as it exists, writers who want to learn about writing, it isn't a one-to-one really anymore. It's like you guys, I think you guys will be very interested in them, but it's not the same thing. It's like, can I give any examples without giving names?
Yeah, okay. I was trying to figure out how to put some connective tissue to this, so I'll actually grab that. No idea is born in isolation, right? Ideas are, there's a little piece here and there's a little piece here, and then you all of a sudden see the intersection, and then you have that light bulb moment. So if you rewind several months ago, we had already decided we're closing down the Smart Artist, we're tripling down on fiction, we're bringing new authors into it, and we're training them, we're making them the smartest artists we could possibly be. And we thought, Johnny and I know a lot of really amazing people, and
who aren't writers necessarily.
They're just fantastic humans, and they have a lot to teach us. So it became a thing where, okay, you know what we should do is get these really amazing people to do like calls with our storytellers where we could just ask them questions and really dig into their brain and get their ideas into our books. And so that was a really fun thing for us to do, because no one's really doing anything like that. It's like having these just kind of remarkable experts who, in other contexts would charge like kind of a stupid amount for their time. And they're agreeing. It's not like we offered to have them come on the podcast where they have a platform. We're basically saying, hey, you want to talk to a room full of a few authors and just let them pick your brain for an hour?
Very clearly a favor to us.
But none of them even saw it as a favor. What they saw it as is, oh, well, that's kind of amazing. You want to get your ideas into story. So for example, we have a guest, you're actually going to meet him in a couple of weeks. I think he's coming on our first live show. Which is, I believe, on the 26th, something like that. It's the last Friday of April, which the way that these work, you may be hearing this after we've actually already done it live, but you can still listen on the feed regardless. Yeah, he's just an amazing human. I met him in Park City at my first Mastermind Talks event. And he knows a lot about suicide, and Bonnie and I are crafting an outline that talks about someone kind of like looking in the face of death. And he was a wonderful person to just like get on and talk to about this stuff and talk about, what it really is. Suicide and loneliness. It's almost the existential quandary of human existence. Like he wants to bridge that. So that's a good example of somebody who has just such depth of insight. And, he's not somebody who's going to go out and like, you could sign a traditional deal and, you give them a book pitch and, you write your book and they'll tell you, they'll make you fix it this way, that way, this way, because there's only a certain way you can market nonfiction books and blah, blah, blah. That's not what we're doing with these people. What we're doing is we're going to have an actual event where, like the kind not one that we're charging for. It's not like an old Smarter Artist style. Right. So if you've been to one of our events, though, you automatically can understand what this is like. So we'll be in a room for 2 people for 2 days. There's going to be 4 people in this first event in addition to us. And what we'll do over those 2 days is find out their stories, like what is the positioning? What is the story that they're most able to tell and change the world with, and that people will most respond to? And because there's a big difference between
to use this example, writing a book about suicide and loneliness, it could be some sort of like manual or dissertation, and doing something that is a story where you're following a central character. So the comparison for those of you who already know our books is Write, Publish, Repeat is a little more manually. I mean, it is story-based. You do kind of get our personality, but it is a how-to, hopefully a friendly one, but a how-to. Fiction Unboxed, on the other hand, is really a story about what occurred over these 30 days and then a few after. And you learn a lot of lessons. Like Neeve on the last podcast talked about learning some important lessons from Fiction Unboxed, but you're absorbing it from the narrative story. So that's sort of what Sean's talking about here is finding their story where they or somebody who is central to you're following one person, almost like a character arc.
Do you want to talk about, because I hesitate on any of the other authors to talk about their stuff.
Well, we probably shouldn't, but I think.
Why don't we talk about Dave's? Because
it'll commit him. This will force him to do it.
And I applaud that.
Yeah, me too.
I can't wait to hear what I'm going to write about.
And it's not going to be how to win your marriage, even though we really want you to do that. So this is a little like when you say to your kids when they're little, and you say, "So do you want to go to bed now, or do you want to go to bed in 15 minutes?" And suddenly, once they have a choice, one of those ideas sounds good, even though they both suck. So that's what we're doing with you in your book. You want to do How to Win Your Marriage or this one?
So, Neeve, do you want to talk about Dave's book? I don't even remember, like, one of us.
How to Dave.
Yeah. Well, How to Dave would be a great book.
I like that a lot.
I'd buy the shit out of that. But I do think that there's a book that Dave could write that is going to help people way more than how to plot out a story. Like, that just doesn't matter. And honestly, Dave needs to read that book. So what we have is a book that I think he can read, that is what we want from our nonfiction authors, same as we want from our fiction authors, but I think there's a finer point here. What we want from our nonfiction book authors is, what is the story that only you can write? No one else in the world can write that. And when it's all done, the world is a better place for you having written that, markedly. And I think that this is a really good example that anybody listening to this can hang on to, understand, and get a clear idea of the purpose of what we're trying to do.
So not dead babies on Christmas.
Just stop talking. It's Neve's turn.
Oh, I've always wanted to shush Dave. So, yeah.
You and my wife.
Well, I think actually this is best prefaced with a little bit of story, which is one thing that I did share in a room with you guys was that I've always struggled a lot with anxiety, and I've bonded a lot with Dave over our shared OCD. And, like, we both have the shitty kind, not the cutesy kind of like, oh, the things have to line up and oh, I just want everything to be a particular. No, it's like the bad kind. As I'm sure you all know from hearing Dave tell lots and lots of stories. But what was really interesting for me was, like, I had actually never met anyone else who had OCD. So I had never met anyone else who could really understand what was going on inside my brain.
Do you have to unmeet them 7 times?
No, but like literally I've never met anyone who had the same sort of things going on inside their head. And like, so I spent all this time feeling like, well, I know what I have because, I've obviously been to people and found out, but, and so I knew I wasn't the only person, but I'd never actually met someone like that. And so being able to, so Dave and I spent a weekend sitting side by side in this event, and it was really funny because sometimes we'd whisper back and forth, oh, do you have this funny thing? Yeah, I have that too. Isn't it crazy? But actually, he has been incredibly helpful for me as someone who, like, when you live for a while with any kind of difficulty, you learn a lot, and you learn a lot about managing and coping. And I think actually that much as we all love to make fun of Dave, I think he has a lot to say on.
I like how you just you're new to the company, the water's warm, jump right in. We all love to make fun of Dave.
Well, we do. I mean, like, that's kind of part. It's one of our tropes, but
it is for sure.
But yeah, I think I think that he has, he's had to live with a lot of anxiety and a lot of difficulty, and in that he's learned a lot, and he's helped me a lot in terms of, being able to see what I go through and from a totally different lens. And I think that is something that not just people who have extreme anxiety or things like that, but a lot of us humans, especially in the modern world, live with a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear. And I think Dave has a lot to say on that, much as I'm putting the words in your mouth. But
Can my book title be People Who Hate People?
I think that's
people who are scared of people.
So what's the book?
Fuck if we know.
Well, I think the book will figure it out, during that 2-day process, if we can get Dave to get over his fear to be here. But if not,
The irony.
Part of it will be what I talked about at the summit. And if you missed that, well, you missed out. So,
but yeah, that is true. It's, Dave on so Johnny and I do tend to make this look easy sometimes, just because we're naturally more enthusiastic than Dave. We think about life differently than Dave.
You're not crazy.
Yeah, I was trying not to say that.
I can say it 'cause I'm crazy.
But yeah, Dave, we've also really watched Dave, and it's kind of amazing that Dave actually, in his own way, sometimes works harder than any of us. Now, that's shocking when you look at what we finished.
When you look at this.
But it's true. Dave has to work. Like, when I wake up, I'm ready to work. I'm excited to work. I don't have demons. I have things I have to wrestle. I have resistance, just like anybody. But I don't have to wade through a bunch of shit or fears to just start the day. That's a part of Dave's just daily life. He wakes up, he has to wrestle demons, and then he gets
literally. I do live in Florida.
I think that's just a different place. And I think that he can connect to artists in a way that I can't. I can connect to idea people. I can inspire artists, I think. But on a ground level, I don't have that same connection that Dave does, because I don't have those fears. And I remember going back to the very earliest times. I mean, Dave and I were only working together for maybe 6 months at this point, and the original Collective Inkwell site was just a blog, and we gave writing advice. And I remember writing something where he's like, well, I just don't even know where you're coming from. And I was shocked, because we hadn't worked together that long, and I never met Dave in person, and he really did catfish me a little bit. Right.
I'm completely normal.
I just had no idea. And the post that I wrote was The Myth of the Tortured Artist, and all about how I just didn't buy that, and you don't have to be miserable to create, and creating should come from a place of joy. And Dave was like, that was when I realized we had two totally different love languages. And he's like, but writing is misery. And so I think that as far as somebody who could break that down, and really not just like, that's the beautiful thing about these Stone Table books. We don't have any author who's there alone. There isn't a nonfiction publishing company that I know of or understand or at all who is going to approach the craft this way, where we're taking somebody with a lot of knowledge and a lot of, somebody who can be a change agent, and really working with them to shape the story that they're going to tell in a pre-production place. So we don't really know exactly what Dave's story is going to be. What we know is what it's going to do. And it's going to change the way you feel about your own fear and your own anxiety, because he's going to be telling his story, and he's going to be doing it through a powerful lens, and he's not going to be doing it alone. He's going to have me and Johnny and Neeve and everybody else in the company to help get the very best story out of him. And it's going to help a lot of people. It's already one of my favorite books that we're publishing next year.
So my opening line will be, I'm writing this with a gun to my head.
I actually kind of like that. So the two examples that we gave are both vaguely I don't want to say self-help because that carries baggage, but say psychological in nature. They are about improvement or about psychology. So we mentioned like a suicide/loneliness for the one example and fear for the other. That's not what they're all going to be. We just happen to use those two examples. Some of them are about change in the world and exposing, showing new sides to, to things. But again, I don't know that I finished this thought, but previously all of the books that we put out to that were nonfiction were to help artists, to help creators, to learn new bits of their craft or something like that. And even though I think we do think we've had some internal debate about this, but I think that certainly one of the ideal readers for these books is a storyteller who wants to broaden their knowledge of people and different ways of looking at things as sort of an oblique side of a tool set that isn't like I'm going to learn to plot. But I also think that it's a wider audience who's just interested in change and looking at our society in different ways and possibly legacy and upheaval and those sorts of things.
Movement books, right?
Movement books, right? Exactly, movement. So, and that's why Change the World with Story, why that is the tagline for the Stone Table imprint. So, just to keep you guys on center here, because you guys are by definition sort of your podcast listeners. You're almost exclusively probably writers and people who want to write. And these books they're going to kind of be for you, but they're also kind of not in some weird way. I think that there's definitely, if they're a Venn diagram, there's overlap. So this is us sharing like how we're branching out as a company and how we want to have legacy as well as just story. And because these are things that we're passionate about. Like I got my start kind of grandstanding, honestly, on the web. And that went away when it was kind of co-opted by all of the declarative efforts or became, about the podcast and about writing. But that is a part of me, and it's certainly a part of Sean as well, that we do want to like share stuff and take positions on things. And this is a return to that. Now that we're becoming more story-based, we want to have this legacy and mission as well.
Neeve, do you want to talk a little bit, I know we need to close down, but do you want to talk a little bit about just the communication and the fact that, we will start emailing for the Stone Table list and just kind of what to expect?
Yeah. And actually one thing I think that's really important to mention as we talk about phase 2 is not an end to phase 1. We
right.
still are going to continue to come out with books that
we're like the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like our
we will have a lot of books that are specifically for writers and creatives.
In fact, one of the 4 is specifically for writers and creatives, but it's an angle that it's an awesome angle, and none of you guys have read a book like this before, so that's really cool.
Yeah, so the phase 2 books will be in addition to, and I'm sure we will coerce Dave into putting tons of Target stories into his book, because I just can't imagine it without.
A Dave book without Target stories is garbage.
Well, I have to say that like I listen to a lot of The Worst Show Ever, and
I'm sorry.
A lot of your stories. And it's funny, actually, the amount of time, which has made me realize how warped my own brain is, because the amount of times I've been completely on Dave's side, and you guys are laughing at him and like, but they lick their fingers. Like, what is wrong with these people?
Wow. A Worst Show Ever listener who's on Dave's side. That's just amazing.
I know. Well, it's made me, actually, it's made me go, maybe I do need therapy.
There is no one in your demographic, Neeve.
The one and only person siding with Dave. No, but eventually we will create an army of Daves when he writes his How to
Dave. Daves. That could be a sequel.
Imagine if it met York's army of me.
So the first book is How to Dave, and then the second book is an army
of Daves. Yes, and then it'll all end
by one of the Daves.
They already made a movie about that. You remember that Bruce Campbell movie, Army of Darkness?
I do.
That's Dave's army.
Yeah, but we are absolutely like, and if you have been following and you're on the if you've been on the mailing list for anything related to anything we used to do, you've probably already been seeing a couple emails from us, and I'm sure we can ask Jim to we'll put something where you guys can opt in as well if you want to. so that you can follow along and see what we're doing. Because we are sharing stuff regularly now through email and letting you know when we're releasing stuff and all that great stuff. This is the really boring part, so you know, we can just smooth on past this.
All right. So to close it up, just join the list, stay on the list. Do we have a single opt-in anymore that isn't the old style autoresponder, whatever?
I'm sure
Make
by
up
the
a
time
URL quickly. We'll get one in there.
Yeah, by the time this comes out, the URL howtodave.com. No, we'll have something that you guys can opt into, just at least to be on the release list, so that you get to hear about when things are being released. And at the moment, as well, I think when this comes out, we are still collecting our stories for Smarter Artist Locker. So if you want to be part of that, part of the ongoing story, I think it's a pretty cool opportunity to be included and to be able to to be part of something really cool and be part of that collection and part of putting the stamp on the old Smarter Artist before we move on. Then absolutely there'll be a way to do that somewhere in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, in the description.
So we don't have a URL yet, is that correct?
No, unfortunately, I'm not.
All right, so if you're listening to this, go look at the show notes.
Something.
All right. Do we want to, because we can come up with a URL right now and then make the page. Do we want to do that?
sterlingstone.net/ whatever that is.
Right now it's at
phase 1.
Do we know if there's a stone table? Okay, this is so awesome for everybody listening.
I love it when we do stuff like this.
Like, right. wait, we're so unprepared. Well, that I did warn you, Sean. I was like, I can come on, but I have no idea where to send.
All right. There's nothing at the page. So why don't we go sterlingandstone.net/stone table, all one word, and we'll have something up there.
Right, but the fun part is now we have to remember to put something there, because otherwise you guys are going to be
I'm making a note. Making a note right now.
All right, well, so let's wrap it up on that. But you'll just look forward to more stuff on this. Like, we'll keep telling you about it. We're recording live now, hopefully by the time you get this, at least at the end of April, on Fridays at 2 Central Time. sterlingandstone.net/SSP. Is that right? I think so. We don't know our URLs today, and you guys can just come and join us live if you want. Otherwise, just keep listening on the feed. Do whatever you want. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Adios.
Rock on. Bye-bye.